Hi there, I'm JC Garrison. I'm an environmental planner with the Oakland County Water Resources Commissioner's Office. And today I'd like to talk to you about watersheds and the water cycle and how important it is to keep our fresh water clean and free of pollution from stormwater runoff. So let's get started. So today I have with me Knox and Brady, my scholars for the day. We're all going to learn lots of important information. Whenever I start to talk about how important it is to keep our water clean and how much fresh water we have on Earth to share amongst everybody, I always like to talk about how much water we really have on Earth to share. So if we look at this globe here of the Earth, we see a lot of blue, right? That's all the water. How much of the Earth's surface do you think is covered in water?
25%.
25%? What do you think, Max? 95? Okay. Well, that's kind of opposite ends of the spectrum. It's actually about 75%
Who's closer?
of the Earth is covered in water. I think you were a little closer, Max. But the difference is, when it comes to water, more of it's salt water than fresh water. Can you guess how much salt water there is on Earth compared to fresh water?
67. 96.
97% is salt
What did
water.
Brady
And we've tasted salt water before, right?
Yeah.
Pretty gross. Can't drink that, right?
Yeah.
No. So we need fresh water to drink and for things like bathing and washing, and we need fresh water for making things too, even. And for growing our food. We certainly couldn't water with salt water because that would kill the crops, the plants. Yeah. When we look at the amount of fresh water on Earth, here's a graphic I like to show. If we take all the water on Earth, I mentioned the 97% is salt water, right? So that leaves 3% fresh water. Well, of that 3%, that small little piece of the pie here, most of that is actually frozen in the glaciers. We can't get to it if it's frozen, right?
Yeah.
So 70% is locked up in glaciers and ice caps. Another almost 30% is very deep underground where we can't get to it.
I have a question.
Okay.
Glaciers fall down. Did they was it because of sunlight or something?
Yeah, so as the Earth warmed, the glaciers melted, and that is what created the Great Lakes actually that surround us, is from the glaciers that surrounded Michigan and created the fresh water, because that frozen water is fresh. Until it melts, it's not available for us, right? So if we take out the frozen water and the very deep water underground, that leaves just 1% of that 3% that is in our lakes, streams, and rivers, and in shallow groundwater, to where we can get to it from a well. But I want to show you this as well. So here's another graphic of how much water we have on Earth. All right. So this is the Earth, the globe. You see this very large blue sphere? So that's all the water on Earth. That's salt water and the fresh water all together in one volume sphere. So this is all the water on Earth, fresh water and salt
Is this a
water.
real picture?
Well, some scientists put this together to help us visualize how much water there is on Earth.
Okay.
So if we take out the salt water, that 97%, that leaves this smaller blue sphere here, that 3%, right, of fresh water. Remember how I mentioned most of that's unavailable? It's in ice caps or glaciers or very deep underground.
Yeah. Super tiny one.
Yes, so you see the super tiny dot? That's all the fresh water on Earth that is in our lakes, streams, and
It
rivers,
looks like
and
2%.
shallow groundwater. So in relation to these other types of water, that's really not all that much water to share amongst everybody, is it?
Yeah.
So it shows you how important it is to keep that clean. Because you know another thing about the water on Earth?
What?
All the water we have now is all the water we'll ever have.
Really?
We don't get new water. That's right. Our water moves around on Earth through the water cycle. Have you guys learned about that yet?
Yeah. I know the song of it.
That's right. We have a little song we can sing, don't we? Well, let's talk about the water
I might
cycle
forget
first.
it.
I like to call the water cycle the water recycle because, remember I mentioned all that water we have just moves from place to place. We don't get new water that comes in from outer space.
Basically recycle it.
When the Earth was created, all the water that was here then is the same water that's here now. So when the dinosaurs were here, same water. It just keeps getting cycled and recycled. The thing about the water cycle is we have most of our water in the oceans, right? But that's salt water that we can't use.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we get the fresh water out of the water cycle?
I only swim in the salt water.
Remember that experiment we did where we put the salt water in the cup
Mm-hmm.
and we waited for it to evaporate over the course of 7 to 10 days?
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
salt built up on the spoon?
Yeah. Yep.
So that's what's happening with the water cycle in real life. So all that salt's in the ocean, and as the water evaporates out of the ocean, it leaves behind the salt, and all the fresh water moves up into the sky. But we know as water evaporates up into the cloud, water is
It falls down as
condensed
rain.
into the
It
clouds.
falls
That's
down.
right. Falls down as rain, or it could be snow, or sleet, or hail in the wintertime.
What about sunlight?
Sunlight is what helps move the water cycle around. Once the water comes down from the sky, we call that a big word that starts with a P. Do you remember what that word is?
Precipitation.
Precipitation. Once the water hits the ground, it's either going to soak in or it's going to run off. And we call that, again, stormwater runoff or surface runoff.
Is it
And that runoff is going to enter
into
lakes, streams, and rivers,
Is like
or
bedrock?
into the ground.
Does water go through bedrock or not?
It can, yeah. There's some little cracks in the bedrock where the water could go through. You guys remember the water cycle song that we sang?
Evaporation, condensation, precipitation. Now goes the water cycle, yeah.
Okay, great. We know how the water moves around the earth and how it gets to where we can use it in our lakes, streams, and rivers. We know we only have 1% to share amongst everybody. Now we're going to shift into talking about stormwater and the issue of stormwater runoff and pollution. When we talk about water pollution, what we're saying is there's something in the water that could hurt the plants and the animals and the humans that either are swimming in the water or live in the water, right? So we might see something like
Wait,
this.
live in the water?
Like
Humans-
fish kills.
What are fish kills?
This might be an indicator of water pollution,
Oh
right?
my
When we see a lot of
goodness.
dead fish.
Oh, that fish.
That's a lot of
Or-
dead fish.
Have you guys heard about beach closures?
Yeah.
Yes, I've seen them.
Yeah, so maybe a beach is closed because of E. coli bacteria contamination, or from too much algae growing. They call it blue-green algae, which can be toxic and hurt people if they were to accidentally ingest that water, or if a dog accidentally drank it, they could get very sick. So there's something in the water that could hurt or make sick the plants or the animals that are wanting to be in that water. So back in the 1970s, we had a really important law passed called the Clean Water Act. So what used to happen back in the day is that factories and industry and things would just discharge their pollution from the things it made, for example, into the water. And we might have seen something like this. Can you tell what that's a picture of?
It's like a bunch of oil in the water.
Yeah, sludge and oil. That person dipped their hand in and it came out black like that. How about this picture? Can you tell what that's a picture of?
Smoke and like the debris.
Mhm.
It's like the water's on fire.
That's right, the water is on fire. So this is the Cuyahoga River in Ohio, and this river caught fire many times actually, several times. This happened in Michigan even, in the Detroit River, the Rouge River. So like I said, companies would just discharge their wastewater or
Oh, I think-
chemicals into the water,
think I
which
know-
floats.
I know how the oil floats and then the fire can catch on it, and it because the oil is like that. It's like floating in the fire.
That's exactly right, Knox. The chemicals something sparked and caught it on fire, and when that pollution incident happened, that was the breaking point. Folks are really up in arms about it and demanded that change take place. So the Clean Water Act was passed in 1972 and led to laws to where industries couldn't pollute like that anymore. So we really started to clean things up, but we're still finding issues today with pollution in the water. So that's what we're going to talk more about today. What we're dealing with is a lot of little things that happen on the land, and when it rains, it gets swept into storm drains. So I'm sure you guys have probably seen something like this before
Yeah.
in parking lots, or maybe just a ditch like this. So when it rains, the water hits the pavement or the grass, and it runs downhill to the nearest storm drain or ditch. And eventually, where does that water end up once it drains away?
In the soil, I think.
It could end up in the ground or the soil. Or if it goes into a pipe, where do those pipes go?
Into lake or ocean.
Of course, over the years, we've built a lot more things, right? We have more subdivisions, more stores, more roads. These are all paved surfaces. Do you think water could soak in through that pavement? If you can imagine, back in history before we had so many houses and stores and buildings, we had more forests and vegetation, right? So the water would soak into the ground. It would also run off as well to replenish our lakes and
Stores
rivers.
are kind of...
We get more runoff as we get more pavement and buildings. So anything that's on the land could possibly get in that stormwater runoff when it rains and get carried to our lakes and rivers, right? So what I also want to introduce you to, the concept of watersheds. Watershed is just an area of land where all the water drains to one particular spot. So it could be a lake, it could be a river, it could be an ocean. So this is a map of southeast Michigan. So Detroit, we've got Oakland County on here, Macomb County, Wayne County, Washtenaw, Livingston, all the various counties in southeast Michigan. If you can imagine, a watershed would be, so the boundary, this dark black line, that's the high spots on the land, okay? And the river, or the waterways that run through there, run through the low spots. The different color coding areas, those are different watersheds.
Okay.
So if we were in this green area, can you tell from the legend here what watershed that would be?
Clinton.
Our watersheds are typically named after the waterway that it drains into. So no matter where you are, you're always in a watershed. The water's always going to drain somewhere. Okay? It's really important for people to understand. We just need to be really careful about knowing our connection with the land and the impact that can have on our waterways. So the next portion that we're going to learn about, I have a model of a watershed that we're going to look at. We're going to investigate, we're going to look at all the different types of pollution, several of them, not all of them, that can typically hurt our waterways. Okay, so now we're moving on to our watershed model demonstration. So we talked about watersheds, right? A watershed is defined by the uphill areas and the downhill areas. So we've got some streams running in our watershed, we've got roads, we have an area that's getting deforested here, we have a factory with a parking lot, we have a farm, we have a residential area like a subdivision. They're clearing some land here to build some homes. And of course we have our lake downstream. First, we're going to talk about the different types of things that can get on the land that could get into the water when it rains or snows and the runoff gets into the storm drains and the ditches, and what can happen to our lakes, rivers, and streams once all that possible pollution washes down. Okay, so the first type of pollution we're going to talk about is something called soil erosion and sedimentation. So have you guys ever seen something like this where the
if it rains, the river or the lake gets really cloudy with
I see
dirt and mud.
That. I've seen it before.
It's real cloudy. Well, that's from what we call soil erosion. So if you're building a home and you don't have proper soil erosion controls in place, so have you seen this black fencing before?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so we have that at construction sites when we're building. And what this is supposed to do, if it's put in correctly, is it holds the soil back but still lets the water pass through. The problem with this example here is that it's not trenched into the ground, so the water's getting right underneath and
Because I can
eroding
see
all this bare soil away.
I can see a little crack.
When that happens, it can lead to something that looks like this.
Oh, it's like a flood.
We call this turbidity in the lake or stream. Why do you think cloudy water like this would be bad?
Because there's
What might hurt the water quality?
the animals in it. Like
The fish and the amphibians and things that live in that water. Fish, for example, would find it very hard to breathe in that cloudy, dirty water. It would be like a dust storm running through our house. It would be really hard to breathe in all that dust, wouldn't it? So, in our watershed here, where might we have soil erosion going on?
Maybe like here.
Okay, so where they're deforesting, they're cutting
Yeah.
down the trees and all
No,
the vegetation's gone now?
I went here.
Okay, well that's another area, isn't it? Say we have a forest where the trees are getting cleared, so we're getting some soil exposed there, right? Next, you pointed out the construction site, right? There's no silt fence around the edge. Where else?
Maybe the farm.
Okay, yep. We have the farm where it's been tilled. They're getting ready to plant some crops in there. But there's nothing, no vegetation between the water and the land to help hold that soil
Like
back,
this.
is there?
Yeah, so it will go in the
Okay. We've got a gravel road here.
Yeah.
It's like we live on, right? If that gets washed away, that could be problematic. Anywhere else?
And
Okay.
these slopes.
The stream bank here has no
Yeah,
vegetation.
right here.
And then along our lake, that's clear as well, isn't it? Nothing
Yeah.
to help keep that soil in place. Okay. Lots of areas of soil erosion going on. So the next one we're going to talk about is nutrient pollution. You've probably heard about fertilizing your lawn,
Yeah.
right? So fertilizers are good for the lawn and for crops because it gives the plants nutrients, minerals, vitamins they need to grow just like a human would, right?
Yeah.
Humans eat, take vitamins to help them grow big and strong. Well, fertilizer does the same thing for plants. The thing about nutrients and fertilizers, for example, that's bad is when they get put somewhere that we don't want them and when they could get washed away. So if you notice in this picture, we have all these little granules that are in the street.
Yeah.
So that's from when you applied the fertilizer with a spreader, say. Those granules got onto the pavement and no one swept them back onto the grass where they belong. So when it rains, those granules are going to get washed right away. Well, why would that be bad? Lead to something like this. Algae growth, too many weeds growing. Remember I mentioned early on in our presentation about the blue-green algae that can be toxic to people?
Yeah.
That's an example of that.
Well, look at that big zoom out.
Several years ago in Lake Erie, and well, this happens from time to time, but too many nutrients get washed into Lake Erie and can lead to this, it looks like pea soup. It's blue-green algae that grows that can produce
Look
toxic.
at the fish.
Yes,
It looks
fish
like-
gills in there.
It looks like spinach salad with like a green avocado thing.
The problem with when we get too much plants that grow in the water, it uses up the oxygen in the water that the fish need to breathe, for example. You wouldn't want to swim in water that looked like that, right? Yeah. So the important thing with the nutrients, and even grass clippings like you see here, when those get washed away, that's considered nutrients too that can get in there. We don't want too many nutrients in the water because that can lead to problems. in our watershed, where might we have
I know
fertilizers
some.
that got misapplied?
Right here.
So the crops, right? Yeah, so if the farmer fertilized his crops, but again, we have no buffer or filter of vegetation between the water and the land, right?
Like long too. Long.
Okay, so remember what I said about the lawn? So fertilizer for the lawn is okay. It's when the fertilizer gets onto the paved surfaces where it can run off, right? When it rains. So we're concerned about the fertilizer that gets on the driveways and the sidewalks and things like that, right? Okay. So
What
we
about the
have that.
driveways? Like the driveways.
Yeah, I mean, some of it could have gotten out here, I guess. If
What
he was
about,
doing, he or she was fertilizing out there.
This stream that goes along.
It probably wouldn't get in there. I mean, you could fertilize around that building there, I suppose, right?
Right.
It's not just in residential areas. It could also be commercial. Okay. So the next one we're going to talk about is possible nutrients, but also bacteria and viruses that could get in the water from not picking up after our pets soon enough. Our dogs can't pick up after themselves, can they?
No.
Who's responsible for doing that?
Humans.
That's right, we need to do that. Especially like in the wintertime when your dog goes outside, it gets covered in snow, we don't always pick that up right away.
Yeah.
Think about in the springtime when everything's thawing and draining. If you have a bunch of pet waste by a storm drain or something and you didn't know, and all that moist, laden pet waste is getting washed down the drain.
Ew.
Yeah, so that's a critical time to make sure we pick up our pet waste. Always is important, but especially in the springtime when we have all that thaw.
Yeah.
But also, not only pet waste could be an issue, but say geese droppings. If we are feeding the geese in a park and all those goose droppings get in the grass, that's a source of nutrients and bacteria. Or also on farms, right? So this cow we have here, if that was weighted down into the water and it's dropping manure all over the place and that gets washed away, that could be a source as well. Okay, so here's our pet waste manure. Where in our watershed might we have that?
Like around here because.
Okay, so that cow, right? If he's meandering too close to the water. Okay.
And like around here because dogs and
Okay, yep. So have you ever been walking in the park and saw like tiles laying around that people didn't pick up after? Yeah, that's the worst. And it's such a simple thing to do, to pick up after our pets.
Maybe like this beach right here because the dogs can go on.
So maybe
And
dogs
the
or
geese.
geese. Yes. This is an obvious one. You guys talked about this earlier, right?
Trash
in the litter.
Yeah.
This is one of the simplest things we can do,
In here.
is making sure our trash goes in the right place.
I see some trash.
So where in our watershed might we have trash and litter going on?
Right here, down here.
Along the roadways?
Yeah. And like
Oftentimes,
in
right?
the lake. And some in the ocean.
How do you think the trash gets along the roadways?
Because people don't care about the earth and they just throw it all.
Yeah, so people just being careless, maybe they
What about
threw it out the window,
in the
or it was
ocean?
in the back of their truck and it blew out.
Put it in the ocean. Like,
Maybe they didn't know. This is a big one that gets me all the times when people put their trash to the end of the street, to the curb,
yeah,
the night before, and animals get into it and tear the bags open,
like that. And they fly out.
and then the trash blows everywhere, and a lot of times
Like-
people don't pick it up. We could possibly have that going on in our residential area, right? Anywhere else?
Yeah, like maybe at like the end, because like if there's a dead end, there's a bunch of like trash over there. Then maybe,
Maybe
if you're
some
going,
illegal dumping.
yeah, and maybe like dogs will like have a walk and then they'll like make there's like they'll go through the trash.
Maybe this parking lot as well.
Yes.
Have some blown around. Okay. And then the last one we're going to talk about is oil and grease. Have you ever been walking in a parking lot and saw something that kind of looked like a rainbow if it had rained and it's
Yeah, I've seen
swirling
that before.
around?
Yeah.
Where do you think that oil came from? in a parking lot?
From boats and ships.
Okay, so sometimes we have oil spills in our oceans from ships. That could happen.
Oh, it fell.
But more often, we have just everyday
That kinda
cars
looks like
that are
oil.
leaking oil,
Yeah.
right? People's cars aren't maintained properly. And the grease and oil that gets into the runoff and can get
Oh,
carried
this
out
is
to our
the
lakes
oil?
and streams.
That's the oil.
Petroleum products don't mix well with aquatic life. It could hurt them quite badly. So we definitely don't want oil getting into our waterways. Where might we have oil and grease?
Maybe on like the
Contamination
side of
in
the
our
road or
watershed.
something, or like on the road.
From?
Like maybe like on bridges, like they could float. It could
Where
flow
did it come
into
from?
The tractor,
Maybe the tractor had a leak?
or like the car.
Okay.
If the oil comes out and it could like when the bridge goes down, it could like flow on the side and then around. And
So the car had a leak as well? Okay, it could happen. Maybe the bus, same thing, right? We
What
talked
is the
about
oil? Like
this is soy sauce for our oil and grease. The boat,
soy sauce.
Yeah.
sometimes we could have a leak directly in the boat, in the water. Anywhere else?
Maybe like in the pipe, or like coming out of the pipe.
here.
So sometimes we have accidents at a factory, right? Maybe
Yep.
something got into the pipe. Sure, that could happen.
Oh,
Maybe this car leaking in the parking lot. We talked about that, right? Let's
Yeah.
move this guy over here. Okay. So these are a lot of the common types of pollutants that can get on the land in our watersheds.
Oof.
So now we're going to make it rain and we're going to see what
Ooh,
happens
smells.
to all that pollution. Ready? See how the water is draining downhill
And the oil. I see
in
the
the
oil.
lake, in the streams,
I see the oil coming
and going down to the lake, isn't it?
I see
Yeah.
the oil and the poo coming down.
All that pollution is running down
It looks like a tsunami or like
into
a
our
flood.
precious lake. Would you guys want to swim in that lake now?
No, disgusting.
Absolutely not.
No, not at all.
Be very difficult for the fish to live in there,
There's oil at
and the turtles and the frogs. Look
Oh,
at
it's like
that.
clay.
Look at that pollution swirl down in there from that factory that came out. So I have a question for you guys. Who created all this pollution?
Animals, cars, people, humans, boats,
That's right.
cars, boats.
So
Like
if we
houses.
created a lot of this pollution, who's responsible for preventing it?
The rain.
Well, the rain's gonna happen regardless. Who's responsible for making sure the pollution doesn't get on the land in the first place?
Humans.
That's right, all of us, right?
Yep.
All of us. So that's why it's so important for us to understand our connection between the land and the water. So once we know what can hurt the water, we can make better choices about making sure we don't take actions that will hurt, right?
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
There's
So what's one
trash
thing
can
that you
in
can
there.
do to help keep our water clean?
maybe convince people to not do it.
Okay, so share what you learn with your friends and family.
Yep. Maybe
Okay, how about you, Knox?
learn from your mistakes.
Okay, sure, we all make mistakes. No one's perfect, but once we know the dangers of what we might be doing, making changes is, yep. And we talked about the pet waste, making sure we pick up after our pets right away. We don't want to feed the geese and the ducks because that makes them congregate in one area a lot and they can really get the concentrated droppings of
Yep.
water. That's not good. What else? What do we do if we fertilize? Remember those granules that might accidentally get into the road?
It could blow into the road.
Yep, so we want to make sure we sweep that off back into the grass where it belongs. Okay.
Like when we mow our grass, it gets all on the driveway, and then we have to like blow it into the grass
Yep,
again.
we want those grass clippings off of the road as well, because as that breaks down, that essentially is nutrients that can get into the water and cause too many weeds to grow. Absolutely. So, the important things I want you guys to remember out of everything we learned today is, Remember how we talked about all the water we have now is all the water we'll ever have.
Yep.
And we only have 1% of all the water on earth is fresh water that we need to share amongst everybody.
Yep.
And it's always easier to prevent pollution rather than trying to clean it up after it's already happened.
Is when the pipes, like when the water goes back like down into the pipes, does it like get cleaned in there, or does it just like flow into somewhere else?
Wonderful point, Knox. I didn't cover that. So there is a difference between stormwater and wastewater and how that gets treated, right? So stormwater that runs off of our driveways and parking lots and whatnot, typically that just gets piped right out to the lake or stream without any treatment. Now the water that flows down our drains from our bathtubs and our kitchen sinks, that goes to a sanitary sewer system where it gets carried off to a wastewater treatment plant. Or if you live out in the country like we do, we have a septic system out in the front yard
Yep.
where
Yep.
the solids go into a tank that we have pumped out every 3 to 5 years, and the liquids drain out to the drain field, and the microbes in the earth clean that water as it filters through and naturally cleans that water.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's an important point that a lot of people don't know, Knox, is that stormwater is untreated when it gets to the water. Yep. All right. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and learned a ton of new things. I'm going to also put some links to more information where you can learn just tons of other tips on how you can protect our waterways. Thanks for watching.